We have entered the third millennium through a gate of fire.
During the 2000s, a series of events would take place that would spark the first major internet social movement, New Atheism. The attacks of September 2001 in the United States, followed by further attacks in Madrid in 2004 and London in 2005, would lead many to see Islamic fundamentalism not as a cancer secluded in a far-off land, but one that was metastasizing into the secular West. Well, the somewhat secular West. Because on both sides of the Atlantic, conservative Christianity was also flexing its muscle. George W. Bush had entered the White House in 2001 with the support of the evangelical Christian vote. The Christian right had already come into prominence during the 1980s, then subsided during the 1990s, only to come back in full force with one of their own in the Oval Office. This involved classic tales such as multi-millionaire televangelists claiming that Hurricane Katrina was caused by a gay pride parade. I didn't know fishnets and dong-shaped lollipops can affect climactic conditions. Or, for example, Benny Hinn, helping the Holy Spirit enter the bodies of his disciples through the power of smacking people with his jacket. They had a profound impact on a variety of social issues such as access to birth control, gay rights, sex ed, denial of evolution, and climate change, along with support of Israel and an aggressive foreign policy to oppose the aforementioned threat of Islamic fundamentalism. What's the power of a self-detonating Abdullah compared to the power of Christ and an M1 Abrams tank? Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, Western Europe had become more secular over the past several decades, but that didn't prevent Pope Benedict, who had become the head honcho of the Vatican in 2005, from promoting a very doctrinaire and traditional version of Catholicism. He even claimed that condoms exacerbated the AIDS crisis. He promoted abstinence instead, which, to be fair, is a great way to not get an HIV infection if you ignore the reality that people are really, really horny, as the internet clearly shows. In response to all of this, a series of books would be published by a number of atheist authors. Neuroscientist Sam Harris would write Letters to a Christian Nation, and later, The End of Faith. Evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins would write The God Delusion. Journalist Christopher Hitchens would write God is Not Great. And philosopher Daniel Dennett would write Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. The term New Atheism was coined by tech publication Wired magazine, as it would become clear that these books led to a massive online following. This was in contrast to the, I guess you could call it, old atheism of Bertrand Russell, Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, and Sigmund Freud. The core tenets of the new atheist movement were that 1. Religion is BS, and 2. That religion is harmful. Side note, Daniel Dennett was actually agnostic on the second claim, and as a result of this, he didn't really have the aggressive persona of the other three, let alone the self-proclaimed skeptics and non-self-proclaimed neckbeards that followed these guys on the internet. While there were some in-real-life events related to atheism during this time, such as the conferences like Mythicist Milwaukee and the 2012 Reason Rally, which by the way attracted somewhere between 8,000 to 30,000 people on the Washington Mall, most of the activity nonetheless was online. Dawkins, Harris, and most of all Hitchens would gain massive, dare I say, devout followings of fellow atheists in what some would describe as cult of personalities. Hardline atheist and biologist P.Z. Myers would set up the blog Pharyngula, which would become one of the most popular in the world at the time, alongside other atheist blogs such as the Friendly Atheist taking a less aggressive approach. There was also the massive online talk show called The Atheist Experience. A prominent meme during this time that you almost certainly have heard of before was the Flying Spaghetti Monster God, under the parody religion of Pastafarianism, which is a portmanteau of pasta and the religion Rastafarianism. To my knowledge, it has no relation to Bob Marley. The meme was an internet version of the 20th century philosopher Bertrand Russell's teapot argument. The argument is an attempt to shift the burden of proof onto the person making the claim as opposed to the person who wants to debunk the claim, because otherwise we would apply that same standard to utterly absurd propositions like the existence of a teapot in space, which is too small to detect, or, in its modern rendition, the existence of a monster deity composed of semolina wheat flour noodles and meatballs. In other words, according to the analogy, if we take Christian claims about God and the burden of proof seriously, then we must also believe in a cosmic orbital teapot and a deity that manifests itself in the form of an Italian-American dish. Now keep in mind that Russell's argument is controversial among philosophers, even atheist philosophers to this day, but the argument was widely taken by online atheists as gospel. And yes, I'm using that word on purpose. On Reddit, r/atheism would emerge as one of the largest subreddits, and lo and behold, it has a teapot as its icon. We'll get to this online circle of gigabrains shortly. In 2006, the Rational Response Squad would emerge to, in their own words, debunk claims made by Christians and other people of faith. That same year, many members of this movement would take part in what was known as the Blasphemy Challenge. According to the Gospels, denying the existence of the Holy Spirit is the one unforgivable sin.
I deny the Holy Spirit.
All of it. Don't try to save us.
There isn't all?
Two of the Horsemen, Hitchens and Dennett, along with the illusionist Penn Jillette and a budding YouTuber comedian by the name of Pat Condell, took part in the challenge, solidifying their eternal suffering in hell if they were wrong. The event even prompted one of the first major copyright claims on YouTube by disgraced illusionist Uri Geller and allegedly by the Creation Science Evangelism Ministry. Out of the thousands of ordinary atheist YouTubers who made videos at the time, the Amazing Atheist, also known as TJ Kirk, would rise up to become the most well-known of online atheists, famed for his aggressive persona, strident anti-theism, and his aesthetics as an obese loudmouth. During the late 2000s, there was an explosion of YouTube beefs, with the global village of atheists and Christians arguing, yelling, and insulting each other over who could understand the metaphysical fabric of the universe better. These are people who would have never otherwise interacted with each other, people on the other side of the country, or perhaps even on the other side of the world. But with the global village, all these people did manage to communicate with each other through the power of 144 pixel resolution grainy videos. With online platforms, a once small and powerless group held a tremendous amount of influence on the internet. Religious people dominated the IRL institutions, but they were a minority on the internet during this time. Part of the reason for this phenomenon is that atheists tended to be younger, and older people tend to be more religious. As a result of this, older people weren't really on the internet that much during this time. They were mostly watching TV shows, reading books, and reading these ancient hieroglyphics known to archaeologists as newspapers. While the US was one of the few developed nations that still maintained strong religiosity, it was still not immune from the rise of secularism. The millennial generation, which were in their teens and early 20s at the time, had become much more secular than their Generation X and Boomer counterparts. With the internet, young people had access to new information and new places to congregate, at least digitally. Speaking of digital places to congregate, we have to move on to r/atheism. Reddit is essentially the front page of the internet, where like-minded or unlike-minded people can come together through the power of the internet to discuss ideas. And by discussing ideas, I mean shitposting and shitflinging. For a period of time during the late 2000s and early 2010s, r/atheism was so big it became one of the default subreddits. The disproportionate number of people on the subreddit were teenagers, and oh boy, you can sense the acne-infused rage on some of these posts. It is clear that a lot of these people were 14-year-olds who just found out that the story of Noah's Ark is BS 2 weeks ago, and then came to the stunning conclusion that they were groundbreaking intellectuals. Then came the Faces of Atheism, in which these troglodytes would post pictures of themselves with their own quotes about how they're so much smarter for coming to the conclusion that their existence is meaningless. Unless that meaning involves telling people that you are smarter than them for thinking that your existence is meaningless. Now that's meta. At the time, Christianity was seen as lame and atheism was seen as cool and had a monopoly on the aesthetics, kind of like being an intellectual asshole like Dr. House. But it's hard to have a cool aesthetic when many of your members look like they get most of their nutrition from Mountain Dew and Fritos. The final nail in the coffin was a Reddit post by A. Lewis, who stated, "Just to be clear, I'm not a professional quote maker. I'm just an atheist teenager who greatly values his intelligence and scientific fact over any silly fiction book written 3,500 years ago. That being said, I am open to any and all criticism." And lo and behold, A. Lewis received a lot of criticism, because his aphorism read as, quote, "In this moment, I am euphoric, not because of any phony god's blessing, but because I am enlightened by my own intelligence." He added A at the end, so I'm guessing he is Canadian, and if so, then as a Canadian, I apologize on our country's behalf. This post spread like wildfire across the internet. Memes and posts mocking the pseudo-intellectualism of online new atheists were churned out like the potato chips these Redditors gained their subsistence from. The mockers had become the mocked. Keep in mind that much of the fuel for the online atheist movement was not so much science, reason, logic, evolution, or even atheism itself. It was rather the aesthetic of presenting oneself as an intellectual above the nano-brain believers. And with the aesthetic of new atheism transformed away from that of the intellectual asshole into the pseudo-intellectual nacho cheese guzzler, the fedora-tipping rats were jumping the fedora ship into the ocean of Mountain Dew and Pepsi. The troll image board 4chan even posted images of one of Hitler's anti-religion quotes misattributed to Richard Dawkins on Reddit, which these self-proclaimed skeptics blindly believed. Many pointed out the online atheist movement's fixation with being intolerant of differing beliefs, aggressive proselytizing of views, and all around being an insufferable group of asswipes. This meant that a lot of these hardline atheists actually shared a lot more in common with the fundamentalist Christians that they are so fond of bashing. But the enemies of Fedora kind outside of the movement were no match for the enemies within, given the fact that much of the new atheist movement was centered around fighting the Christian right, particularly on issues related to creationism, gay marriage, and abortion. Most of the new atheists usually leaned on the left side of the political spectrum. However, many atheists wanted to steer away from atheism in and of itself into what they called social justice. This was centered around identity politics in relation to race, gender, and sexuality, what some would call wokeness today. PZ Myers of the Feringula blog was at the forefront of this movement, which would be called Atheism plus social justice. In other words, atheism with intersectional feminist identity politics rather than atheism alone. This would lead to the 2011 incident Elevator Gate, in which atheist feminist Rebecca Watson claimed that she was harassed by a man offering her coffee in an elevator. This led to Richard Dawkins mocking her in a blog titled Dear Muslima, or Dear Muslimlina, I don't really know how you're supposed to pronounce it, along with many young men online who noticed the parallels between religious Puritanism and feminist Puritanism. However, P.Z. Myers and other major figures supported Watson. This led to a divide between the pro-feminist atheists who dominated the IRL conferences and formal organizations, and on the other hand, the online side of the new atheist movement, particularly on Reddit and YouTube, spearheaded by the Amazing Atheist and Thunderfoot. Meanwhile, in the non-online real world, new atheist conferences were plummeting in numbers. Mythicist Milwaukee pivoted into debates between feminists and anti-feminists rather than atheists and Christians. The 2016 Reason Rally had a pathetic attendance compared to only a few years prior. And who could blame them when the performances looked like this?
Knock, knock! The atheist! I'm sorry, never mind. I forgot, we don't actually knock on your door and bother you when you're doing other things. Just go back to what you were doing. That's what happens when you tell a comedian they have to be family friendly. They come out and they tell knock-knock jokes. You're welcome. They did that to me.
The next year, science educator Bill Nye, a popular science communicator on PBS and Disney, who was lionized by the New Atheist for his debate against creationist Ken Ham, debuted his new show, Bill Nye Saves the World. It featured a song about gender identity called Sex Junk. The level of cringe was so bad, it makes those Christian pastors complaining about corn look cool.
Options only, hard or moist. My vagina has its own voice. Not vocal cords, a metaphorical voice. Sometimes I do a voice for my vagina. Please don't tell me I'm the only one who does that. 'Cause my sex junk is so much more than either power bottom or a top off. Versatile love may have some butt stuff.
On top of that, many of the forces that caused the movement to come to fruition had already subsided. Evangelical George Bush was replaced with moderate Christian Barack Obama. Pope Benedict, who was notorious for being very doctrinaire and traditional, was replaced with the more modern and charismatic Pope Francis. The threat of extreme Islamism still persisted, but the aggressive and mostly disastrous neocon foreign policy promoted by Hitchens and Harris, including the former support for the Iraq War, made their claims less credible. Speaking of the Middle East, another area of contention between the new atheists and the budding progressive intersectional social justice movement was how to deal with Islam. Many on the left saw Muslims as a minority group who are deserving of sympathy for facing discrimination in the post-9/11 world. However, many new atheists pointed out the rampant discrimination, bigotry, religious violence, science denialism, and anti-intellectualism that exists throughout much of the Islamic world. The progressive left was quite fond of ridiculing Christianity for its reactionary tendencies, but not so much a foreign tan-skinned religion like Islam. For example, Christian fundamentalist Pat Robinson claimed that God chews and spits out gays. Maybe he ate something fabulous. But Pat Robinson never actually threw a guy in short shorts in fishnets off of a roof. One of the most high-profile online moments of this feud was a debate between Sam Harris and ex-Muslim Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, with Sam Harris promoting the more anti-Islamic view and Cenk promoting the more sympathetic view. As a result of these fractures, the movement was falling apart faster than a Reddit mod could inhale a bag of party-sized Cheetos. YouTube atheist channels and blogs faced plummeting views. Well, at least those who stuck to still talking about atheism. Meanwhile, another sort of subject matter was coming into prominence. That was the intersectional identity politics around race, gender, and sexuality. Just look at these key terms. One of the fundamental problems with the atheist movement is that atheism is not a value system, religion, or meta-narrative. It's simply a disbelief in God. That may be helpful in fighting pastors who think abortion causes Islamist attacks, but it is not a philosophy or ideology which can bring people together under one banner in the long run. Making atheism part of your identity is almost on par with someone who makes being a non-origami enthusiast part of their personality. And with that being said, the world, and especially the internet, moved on to different subject matter. Which leads us to the next chapter about the Arab Spring, hackers, whistleblowers, and Occupy Wall Street. Stay tuned. And speaking of my future content, I just want to introduce myself. I am the Wizard of Wit. I cover a variety of fascinating topics from an insightful yet humorous standpoint. So if you want to learn more about the amazing world we live in, please like, share, and subscribe.